Hello, welcome to this week's economy. I'm your host, Dr. Vance Ginn. Thank you for joining me today. Today is episode 24. I'm recording on August 31st, 2023, as this will come out on Friday, September 1st. Can y'all believe it? It's already September. So there's a lot to go on. We're going to discuss a lot of things today on the national economy, the state economy, and some other things that I think you'll find helpful, where I try to keep this under 15 minutes. That way you can have something short and sweet. And if you listen to this on 2x speed on whatever podcast platform that you get this on, you can listen to this in about 7 minutes. That's not much of your time. Please listen every Friday when this comes out. And don't miss the Left Heel Prosper Show. Here are the highlights from this week's episode 59, which was on a Monday, was with Dr. Peter St-Onge. We discussed the economic lessons, including free markets in Taiwan and much more. You can check him out on Twitter and many other places, on Substack as well. He provides some great information on the economy. Don't miss that episode. The upcoming Left Heel Prosper episode 60, already at 60, on Monday, will be with Hannah Cox. Hannah and I, we talk a lot about where she started, how she got to where she is today. I just love hearing a lot of those stories. But we also talked about antitrust, tech innovation and policy, just policy in general, and much more. Don't miss that episode coming up. So let's get right into it now. On the national economy, the latest data that really came out was on U.S. real GDP growth. And it's been slow. We've been talking about that. The economy is really in a period of stagnation, if not recession. We've talked about some of those factors as well. But the Bureau of Economic Analysis put out their second estimate of U.S. real GDP, which just means inflation-adjusted GDP. And it showed that it was downgraded, reduced from 2.4% was their initial estimate to 2.1%. So not a good sign there. So still really weak. And that's for Q2, the second quarter of 2023. But if you look at another measure that we've talked about before, which is the average of real gross domestic product, which is that 2.1% increase, and the real gross domestic income, if you look at the average of those two in the second quarter, it increased by only 1.3%. That's not much growth at all, 1.3%. And that increases it now for that average of those two measures to 20.2 trillion. And there are good reasons to look at both of them or each one of them on their own. I've been looking more at both of them right now, as I think it tells a better picture of what's going on in the economy, and something that we should be following, given a lot of the weaknesses that we see around the economy and how consumers are really concerned about the future of the economy. I think this is all something that we need to make sure that we're keeping an eye on. And this one, to me, is a good measure to look at. And if you think about it, you consider this rate has declined in 3 of the last 6 quarters since Q1 2022, which, as I've noted, look, in Q1 2022 and Q2 2022, it was a declining real GDP, which is when I think the recession really started. There was at least a short recession then, but I think it's been kind of a rolling recession over time. And so if you look at how there were the last 3 out of 6, half of those quarters have now been declining quarters for the average of real GDP and real GDI and their growth rate. If you look at the growth since Q1 2022 to 20.2 trillion, the amount it's at now, that's only a 0.8% increase over the last 6 quarters. So that it indicates the weaknesses that's been going on in the economy, and that it's spilling over into the labor market more and more. The next big thing on the national front was the labor market continues to cool. Per the latest ADP automatic data processing report, there was 177,000 jobs created in the private sector, but that's less than half of the 371,000 jobs that were added in July. So we're continuing to see less growth or some weakening throughout the labor market. Even if you include the household survey as well, we've seen that. And so that's something that we need to keep following, as I think that is another area that will continue to have weakness. Hopefully more people will join the labor force. We might see an uptick in the unemployment rate as people are dropping off of Medicaid, SNAP, and TANF. A lot of those pandemic public health emergencies are expiring, and states are changing up their eligibility criteria, really going back, hopefully, to the eligibility criteria they had before, because it was too lenient. Too many people have been on it. Many people that were not neediest among us who should be on these programs if we're going to have them. And I'd rather see, productive private sector and civil society help people out. But since we have these programs in place now, we need the correct eligibility criteria and make sure we're not just, overspending taxpayer money in the process. And so that may be something we might see an uptick in the unemployment rate. The BLS also reported that job openings, so the number of business openings that they're reporting anyway, that they have openings for, declined by 338,000 to 8.8 million in July. So still high, but that is the lowest since March 2021. So you've got to go back a couple of years now to see that sort of a level. Job openings remain above the unemployed, which is 5.8 million right now, unemployed people across the U.S. So there are 3 million jobs openings more than the people unemployed. So if you want a job, you should be able to find one right now. Well, of course, that means that there may be skill mismatches, regional mismatches, location mismatches, and other things that are out there. But I think also a lot of people are looking for a particular job, that they don't want some of these other jobs that are out there. And there's been a lot of reasons for that. One is immigration, the slowdown of immigration, at least people wanting the jobs, right, and reporting for jobs. That has slowed down quite a bit. We've also seen people sitting on the sidelines from a lot of these social safety nets that are out there. So there's a lot of reasons for that, and they'll be studied for a long time. But I also think that I'm not sure that all these were real job openings to begin with. Remember, all these are expectations, but as interest rates have been going up, higher cost of doing business and everything else, and the slowdown in the economy, they're all falling out really quickly. So it's almost like ghost job openings. We'll see how much that really takes on over time. The next big thing on state level is I had a new report come out at Texans for Fiscal Responsibility talking about Texas needs local spending limits and needs to spend less at the state level. And Texas also needs to eventually eliminate property taxes. And this report goes through what happened during the legislative session this year through the regular and special sessions, that they spent the most in Texas history, the second most property tax cut in Texas history, the most net tax cut in history. So there were some good things, but they could have done more had they not spent so much. And the problem now is that local governments are still going to increase taxes and increase spending, and they really didn't do a lot to reduce that. There was the provision to provide for the $12.7 billion in new property tax cuts, but part of that was compression, reducing the tax rates, which I think is the best way to go. They also raised the homestead exemption by 60,000 to 100,000, which is not a great way because you're narrowing the tax base and you're giving some people benefits over others. It's not a good thing to do in tax policy. And so that was something that I look at in that paper. And what we really need to see are a couple of things. Local debt in Texas per capita, so per person, is the third most out of all the largest states. The only states that are more than Texas are New York and California, right? That's not the sort of company that Texas wants to be in. And so debt is a major issue that needs to be addressed. Maybe there are caps on how much debt is out there or something along those lines, but also providing for more transparency where the actual amount of your tax increase will be on the ballot proposition whenever you approve it as a voter. And also the average cost of what that would be for the average person in Texas, I think will be really important. Also, spending limits. We really need to restrain government spending at every level of government based on population growth plus inflation as a maximum, if not freezing it entirely or even cutting the budget. That's where they really need to do, because so many of them are increasing by much more than that. And I go through some of these largest cities and counties in Texas and talk about the overspending that's happening in this report, and really come up with the idea that, look, we need to expand on the state spending limit that was approved in 2021 in Texas to have it to go to all local governments. And then once we get control of spending, we can get control of taxes and regulations and the growth of government over time overall. And so I think that would be a good key. And then finally, on the tax revenue side, there needs to be more restrictions. And if you limit government spending, you can use the surplus to buy down property taxes. So the state should be doing that like they did with the compression, some of that this time around, but keep doing that until they're eliminated, which would take about a decade for the school maintenance and operation property tax that the state basically controls already. But the other local governments for cities, counties, and special purpose districts, which there are 4,500 local governments across the state of Texas, they should also be limiting their own spending to no more than population inflation and using surplus dollars to buy down their own, moving them more towards sales taxes and everything else. And if they don't have enough in sales tax or that's really the only one they should have at the end of the day to begin to reduce the property tax, then they should at least find ways to limit spending to cut their property tax as much as possible, because then there's going to be competition across the states for all these local governments. Where do you want to live? You want to live in the place with the lowest property tax, right? And so this will create competition throughout the marketplace as a whole. So that's another paper I hope you will go check out. It will have some influence not only here in Texas, but across the country. Some other key things that I want to bring up this week. I had a good piece in townhall.com on the Biden administration's antitrust radicalism reduces consumer satisfaction. I had this paper come out recently with the Pelican Institute on antitrust enforcement. We need to get government more out of the way. But this is another good piece where I talk about how the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, and Lena Khan and the Department of Justice with a Cantor, that they're both going after all these big companies saying that they're monopolies when there's tons of competition that's already out there. If anything, we need more government out of the way so that consumers can have more satisfaction in the marketplace. And so I hope you'll go and check that. I'll put that in the show notes. And then finally, this week, I've been in Chicago for several days as I was at the State Policy Network annual meeting. A great group overall. It's kind of the umbrella for a lot of the state think tanks across the country. So we all get to come together, more than 1,000 people there. It was great to see so many of my friends that were there and they're doing great work across the country. I hope we continue that because we need more liberty and peace and prosperity for everyone, and make sure that it's done in a happy warrior way like we like to do, and make sure that we're also effective in the process. And finally, last but certainly not least, I went to a Cubs game, Chicago Cubs, Wrigley Field, great time, just a great place overall. Look, I'm an Astros fan. I grew up in Houston and everything, but it was good to see the Wrigley Field and really go touch base with a lot of people that were there and see a great game. They won 1-0, which was fun too. So anyway, that was a great time. Well, please check out my show notes page, vanceginn.substack.com, my website, vanceginn.com, and on Twitter, I'm at Vance Ginn. So go check me out on there. I'm tweeting out, or X, really, you're right. It's like x.com now, I should say. Check me out there as I'm always getting right in the information. That's where you can get timely access to my thoughts each and every day. So until next time, let people prosper.